Hello students, so today we are going to study about a new chapter called Portrait of Lady. It is written by Khuswant Singh and it is first chapter of Hornbill, class 11th. Let's get into it. Okay, notice these expressions in the text, infer their meaning from the context. Okay, we have to find out the meaning of these sentences after reading the text. What are these? The thought was almost revolting, an expanse of pure white serenity, a turning point, accepted her seclusion with resignation, a veritable bedlam of chirpings, okay, frivolous rebukes, and the sagging skin of dilapidated drum. Okay, let's get into it. It is tribute of Khuswant Singh to his grandmother. So the line opens with, "My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman." Okay, everybody know old people are old, grand people are old, so she was old woman. Nothing exaggeration, no surprising thing. So my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. So now he says that she has been old and wrinkled for the 20 years. From the past 20 years from which he's seeing his grandmother, she's been the same. She was old and wrinkled. Not a bit changed into her. Now, into physical appearance basically. That's how Khuswant Singh sees his grandmother. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. Now people say that grandmother once been young and pretty and this is auxiliary of past, even had a husband, this is possessive had auxiliary past auxiliary of past tense. So people say that she was once pretty, she was beautiful, she was young, and she had a husband. Basically she got married to a person, but that was hard to believe. But for child, since he saw her, she was old, so he cannot believe it that she's been young and pretty and even had a husband. It was hard to believe. Now the next sentence, my grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece. Basically there is a fireplace. Above the fireplace, अगर मान लेते हैं ये फायर प्लेस है, इसके ऊपर में एक जगह है, रैक है, जहाँ पे आप पोस्टर रख लेते हैं, फूलदानी रख लेते हैं, यहाँ पे नीचे आग लगा लेते हैं आप, ठीक है। ये दीवार है, इस पे भी आप कुछ कभी लोग टीवी रख देते हैं। चलो, तो यहाँ पर hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. In the drawing room there was a grandfather's portrait. He wore a big turban. Turban क्या होता है? This is turban. Usually Punjabi people wear it on their head, something like this. This is turban. And next, and loose fitting clothes, kurta pajama पहना हुआ है. He wore kurta and pajama. Loosen clothes, basically kurta pajama. Now his long white beard covered the best part of his chest. So he had a beard which was white, and the beard was covering the neck and the chest, upper part of the chest. and I looked at least 100 years old. Now, to the boy, the man looked 100 years old. He did not look a sort of person who would have a wife or children. This man doesn't look like that he could have a wife or children. He cannot believe by seeing the poster that this man could get married, because he looked old. Now, he did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. Now, he looked so old that the boy thought he cannot have any child or a wife. He could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. He is so old. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, now the boy questions about the grandmother's youth and her prettiness. He says, I cannot believe that she was young or pretty. The thought was almost revolting. It means if he thinks like that, oh no, once he's been young and pretty, his thoughts revolted. No, it cannot be possible. It cannot be possible, no matter what other people are saying. She has been always old, because he has seen her from last 20 years as she was old and wrinkled. Okay. She often told us of the games she used to play as child. Now, she means the grandmother sometimes tells the child that she was a child once and she used to play games. That seemed quite absurd, but it was absurd. She cannot be young, she cannot be child. She was always old, she was always wrinkled. And when she speaks of the stories of her childhood, that seems quite absurd. It means it doesn't make sense. She cannot be a child. And undignified on her part, since she was old and she's telling something absurd that doesn't fit with logic. She seems she's undignifying her status. And we treat it as like fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Now, the boy used to deal with the stories as, oh, they are false stories, they are mythical stories, just like the stories she tells of prophets, like the religious leaders who used to do some things like Rama, and there is other Hanuman story. There is always mythical stories. They are told by the women. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. So here he explains that she has always been short. Her height was short. Her stature was short, and she was fat too, and her back was slightly bent. She cannot walk straight. ठीक है? This is you people who could walk straight, run straight, but this is old person who cannot walk straight. Now, her face, her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. Now, her face was having wrinkles, lots and lots of wrinkles. Okay, you cannot determine from where they are starting and from where they are merging. They are just crisscross of wrinkles on her face. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. Now the child says, we all were convinced she was always been as we had known her, we had seen her from last 20 years. She's never been young, she's never been pretty, she's never been childlike, childish. She was always old. Old. So terribly old that she could not have grown older. Now, he says, the child says, or the Khuswant Singh says, She cannot get any more older, because she is already at the saturation point of the old. She is the oldest person alive on the planet, and she is not changing from there, and had stayed at the same age. Now she's been old, and now she is now past her age at that point, at that physical condition, now for 20 years. Now she could never have been pretty. Now he is convincing us that she could never have been pretty. She cannot be pretty. She cannot be beautiful. Oh, sorry, but she was always beautiful. Now these are lines which speaks of, no matter she was not pretty physically, but she was beautiful in sense of her emotions, her care, and other aspects which distinguishes her from others. Now she hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Now hobbled means having trouble in walk, and because of some injury or some condition, some physical condition. Since she is old, so she cannot walk straight, so she hobbled about the house. She moves in house in a hobbled position, in a hobbled manner, in a troubled manner, and the attire was spotless white. She was wearing a spotless white sari with one hand. Now her one hand is resting on her waist, the stooped waist, to balance her stoop. Stoop means the bent back. लो पकड़ा दिया मैंने इसको. Now one hand is here and one hand has rosary beads. Okay, beads tied in a string, you must have seen that, and she is walking like that. She is not having any stick right now, but she is having one hand on her back, on her waist, to balance her position, to balance her posture, and one hand is having beads. Now her silver locks, okay, she had white hairs, but the hairs were scattered untidily. They were not well managed. Why? Because she was old. She was not being able to take care of her hairs because of her old age. So her silver locks, white hairs were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face. Now pale means the part of body where which lacks blood supply. Okay, since she is old and her face is covered with wrinkles, folds of wrinkles, puckered face, so she is lacking blood supply, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Now her lips are constantly moving in inaudible prayer. She was always chanting some sort of prayer while going through her beads. Yes, she was beautiful. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. Now he explains her like it is like metaphor. Oh, sorry, simile. Like she was like winter landscape in the mountains. She was like a beautiful landscape of mountains in the winter, which are covered in snow. Her hairs are like snow, and she is like mountain beautiful. an expanse of pure white serenity, like the snowfall on the winter mountains, is like pure white serenity, means peace, lack of stress. She was an expanse of pure white serenity. She was full of that peace in white, pure white, breathing peace and contentment. Contentment means being happy with one's situation or one's condition. Breathing peace. She is now breathing peacefully. She is breathing peace and she is content. She is happy with her condition. She is not complaining with her old age. Now, my grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. Now, he explains, my grandmother and I were good friends. They were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. Now, his parents, Khuswant Singh parents, left me with her, left him with his grandmother, and they went to live in city, and we were constantly together. Now, grandmother and the child were constantly together. She used to wake me up. Now, what grandmother did? She used to wake him up in the morning, get him ready for the school. She said her morning prayers. Now she said her morning prayers in monotonous sing song while she bathed and dressed me. Now she bathed. Whom she bathed? The writer Khuswant Singh. She bathed and dressed him in hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. Now, see, she sings this morning prayer in monotonous tone, monotonous singing tune, and while she bathes him and dresses him for school, in order to make the writer make Khuswant Singh to learn it by heart. Now he says, I listened. He listened it because I loved her voice. He loved her voice. He loved his grandmother's voice, but never bothered to learn it. But never got into having any pressure to learn the song. Then she would fetch my wooden slate. Now she fetch his wooden slate, and which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk. Now she had in earlier times kids used to write on slate. It was blackish slate, and and people used to write on it with the chalk, but excess of chalk makes this whitish. So every day the students had to wipe it all and paint it all fresh to maintain the blackish color or yellowish color, whatever the color of a slate is. Now he says, fetch my wooden slate which has already been washed. So it was already been blackened, washed, and before it was plastered with yellow chalk. Okay, now it was cleaned. A tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen. Now she hands him over the earthen ink pot and red pen. Tie them all in a bundle. She tied them all in a bundle and handed to the writer, to Khuswant Singh. After a breakfast of thick stale chapati with a little butter. Now she cannot wake up early and prepare meal in the fresh meal in the very early morning. She cannot. So she brings out the stale chapati, the chapati which were from the last night, and she put little butter and sugar on it, and then she took Khuswant Singh to school. She carried several stale chapatis. Now she carried several stale chapatis, the chapatis from the last night. for her village dogs. Okay. Now, my grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. Why grandmother used to visit the temple? Because this used to visit the school because the school was attached to the temple. The priest taught us the alphabets. Now, the priest means the pujari, the person who is meant to be closest to the god, taught the alphabet, native alphabets, Hindi alphabets, or if the person lives in Punjab, so Punjabi alphabet, or native regional alphabets, and morning prayers, regional prayers. While the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda, singing the alphabet or the prayer in chorus. Now the children were sitting in the veranda on both sides. Here the priest is here. Now he is teaching the children, and children are singing the alphabets or the songs in chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Now she is around the temple and she is reading the religious text written on the wall. When we had both finished, when the grandmother finished reading the scriptures on the wall and the children learned the alphabet, they would walk back together. They would walk back together to home. Okay. This time village dogs would meet meet us at the temple. Now the stray dogs, village dogs, meet them at the temple door, and they followed us to our home. Now the dogs followed them to their home, growling and fighting. Now they were fighting with each other. They were making sound of making dominance over each other for chapatis. Why they were making dominance over each other? To get more chapatis. And why they were fighting? To get more chapatis. We threw to them. Now they threw the stale chapatis to them, to the dogs. Okay, I think the video is going to be very long if we continue. So from the turning point we will have in next lecture. Thank you.